I found a second phone in my room. It had photos of me. Have you ever had that feeling that something in your room was just off? Not off in an obvious way. Not a piece of furniture moved or a window left open that you didn't leave open. Off in a way you can't put into words. Like a pressure in the air. Like when you walk into a room and you feel like someone just left it. Most people chalk it up to exhaustion, an overactive imagination, stress from the day. And honestly, it probably is that 99% of the time. But what about the 100th time? Think about this with me. You live alone, or you have a room that is entirely yours. A space you control. A space you know every inch of. You know the smell of your clothes. You know where every cable is. You know exactly how many chargers you own, where each one lives, the make and model of every device. You are the kind of person who is hyper-aware of your own space. And yet, imagine opening a drawer that you open every single day and finding a phone that isn't yours. Not an old forgotten phone. Not something a friend left behind. A phone you have never seen in your life, fully charged, screen locked. And when you manage to get inside it, you see yourself. Photos of you, of your room, of your window, of you sleeping. That is exactly what happened to a young woman named Rachel. And what came after that changed her life forever, and it's going to make you rethink every space you call safe. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about stories like this one. If you're new here, welcome. This channel exists because I believe certain stories need to be told. Not because they're easy entertainment, but because they reveal something about human nature, about what people do to each other when no one is watching, about what happens when obsession, control, and something I can only call evil find their way into an innocent person's life. I found a second phone in my room. It had photos of me. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a like if this video helps you, because the story I'm about to tell you is one of the most disturbing things I've ever researched, and it took me months to put all the pieces together. And before we begin, this is real. Names have been changed to protect the privacy of the people involved, but the events, the places, the timeline, all of it is documented. I'll tell you where to look at the end. So, let's get into it. Rachel was 23 years old when all of this started. She lived in a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio. Second floor, 2 bedrooms, a living room, a small kitchen. She shared the space with a roommate named Dana. The two had met in college, graduated the same semester, and decided to split expenses while they figured out their next steps. It was a common arrangement. Nothing extraordinary about it. Rachel worked as an administrative assistant at a healthcare clinic. Dana worked remotely for a logistics company. They had different routines. Rachel left early in the mornings, Dana stayed home most of the time. It was a quiet, low-friction living situation, at least at first. Now, here is what you need to understand about Rachel. She was the kind of person who controlled everything. Not in a neurotic or anxious way, but she was extremely organized. She kept a task list on her phone that she updated every morning. She knew exactly what was in the refrigerator. She had a system for her clothes, a system for the bills, a system for everything. And her bedroom? Her bedroom was a sanctuary. She didn't let anyone into her room. Not because she had anything to hide, but because it was the one space in the world where she felt completely in control. She grew up in a large, loud family with siblings and cousins always getting into her things. Having her own room was an achievement. It was sacred to her. Dana knew this and respected it. In the 2 years they lived together, Dana never walked into Rachel's room without knocking and being invited in. It was an unwritten rule they both honored. So imagine Rachel's state of mind on a Thursday evening in March when she came home from work, opened the nightstand drawer, where she kept a notebook, a USB drive, and some medications, and found a phone that wasn't hers. When Rachel told me this story, and yes, I spoke to her directly, she said the first feeling wasn't fear. It was confusion. She stood there staring at that phone for about 20 seconds before she even touched it. It was a Samsung Galaxy, a mid-range model, plain black case with no identifying marks whatsoever. was charged. The screen lit up when she picked it up, locked with a numeric passcode. She went to the living room and asked Dana if it was hers. Dana said no. Dana said she didn't even know it was there. Rachel said she wasn't entirely convinced, but she went on with her evening, setting the phone on the kitchen table, assuming there was a simple explanation. Maybe a technician who had been in the apartment at some point. Maybe someone visiting Dana. Maybe she herself had forgotten some purchase or device swap she'd made months before and simply didn't remember. But here's the thing. She knew this phone had never been in that drawer before. She opened that drawer every single day to grab her notebook. She would have seen it. By Friday, the phone was still on the table. Dana kept insisting it wasn't hers. Rachel tried a few obvious passcodes, dates, sequences, and got nowhere. She was about to throw it out or take it to the police when, on a random attempt, the phone unlocked. The passcode was their apartment number. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's a coincidence. Someone who knew the apartment number must have left the phone behind. And that would be a reasonable explanation. Until you see what was inside. The camera app was open when the phone unlocked, and the gallery had a single folder. 147 photos. All of Rachel. Not photos downloaded from the internet. Not screenshots from social media. Photos taken inside the apartment. Photos taken from outside her bedroom window at night with her inside. Photos from the hallway leading to the bathroom. Photos of the living room with her asleep on the couch. A photo of her cooking, taken from an angle that could only have been the hallway with the kitchen door slightly open. The oldest photos were 3 months old. The most recent ones had been taken 2 days before Rachel found the phone. 2 days before. Rachel told me that when she realized what she was looking at, she was so paralyzed she couldn't even breathe properly. It wasn't a sudden shock. It was the kind of terror that creeps in slowly, like cold water rising through your body from the feet up. She said she sat at the kitchen table for maybe 10 minutes without being able to move, holding the phone with both hands, going through photo after photo. And then she saw something that made her jump to her feet. One of the photos was taken from inside her bedroom, with her sleeping, taken from inside the room. From inside. Rachel called the police that night. 2 officers came to the apartment, took her statement and documented the phone. They took the device in for technical analysis. They said it would take a few days. In the meantime, Rachel changed the lock on her bedroom door. She slept with a chair wedged against it. She didn't tell Dana what she'd seen in the photos, not because she suspected Dana, but because she was in shock and didn't know what to say to anyone. She searched her entire room. Every corner. Every drawer. Under the bed. Inside the closet, behind the books on the shelf. And here is what most people don't realize about situations like this. When you're looking for something like this, a hidden camera, a recording device, you usually don't know what you're looking for. Spy cameras today are smaller than a dime. They're built into smoke detectors, into phone chargers, into clothing buttons, into wall outlets. You can look directly at one and see nothing. Rachel found nothing immediately. But the police report that came back 4 days later contained a piece of information that changed everything. The phone had been purchased with cash at an electronics store in downtown Columbus, 3.5 months before Rachel found it. No registration. No receipt with a name attached. The technician who analyzed the device said the photos had been synced, meaning the phone was not the only copy. The images were being sent somewhere. Someone was receiving those photos in real time. And that someone knew Rachel had found the phone. Because 2 days after she found it, the photos stopped. This is where it gets really interesting. And when I say interesting, I mean disturbing in a way that is going to stay with you for the rest of the day. The police started investigating the circle of people around Rachel. Ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, co-workers. Anyone who had ever had access to the apartment or who knew the apartment number. Rachel had ended a relationship 8 months before. Her ex-boyfriend's name was Marcus. They had dated for 2 years. The breakup was her decision. She said Marcus never handled it well, that he kept trying to reconnect for months afterward. Messages, calls. Once he showed up at her workplace saying he needed to talk. She asked him not to do that again. He promised he wouldn't. The police went to speak with Marcus. He had an alibi for the days of the most recent photos. He had been out of Columbus on a documented work trip. But here is where the story starts to branch in a way I did not expect when I started researching this. Marcus didn't come alone when he was questioned. He arrived with a friend, a man named Derek, who he introduced as a co-worker. The detective leading the case, a man named Warwick, told me he didn't pay much attention to Derek in that first meeting. Derek was quiet. He said little. He seemed like someone just there to support a friend being questioned. But Warwick had an instinct. He said there was something about the way Derek looked, not at the detectives, not at Marcus, but at the phone sitting on the table. Derek looked at that phone the way you look at something you recognize. Derek was 31 years old, single. He lived in an apartment 8 blocks from Rachel's. He worked with Marcus at a company that installed residential security systems. Let that sink in for a second. A residential security systems installation company. The man who had potentially been surveilling Rachel was professionally trained to install cameras and monitoring systems inside homes and apartments. Warwick obtained a court order to examine Derek's devices. On Derek's computer, they found an encrypted folder. When they gained access to that folder, they found not 147 photos of Rachel. They found over 2,000. And they weren't only of Rachel. There were photos of at least 4 other women. Some of them in different apartments in different neighborhoods. At least 2 of them in situations that constituted the most severe possible violation of privacy. Derek had done this before. Probably long before Rachel. But the connection to Marcus still wasn't clear. Why was Derek with Marcus at the interrogation? How did they know each other beyond work? The answer Warwick found when he dug deeper was the one nobody expected. Marcus and Derek had met in an online community. I'm not going to name the forum here because I don't want to drive any traffic to that kind of content, but to describe what it was. A closed forum where men shared techniques for non-consensual surveillance. Where they discussed equipment, best practices for avoiding detection, how to sync images to private servers. Where they shared images of the women they monitored as if they were trophies. Marcus hadn't installed any cameras in Rachel's apartment. Marcus hadn't taken a single photo. But he had shared the apartment number, her habits, a description of the internal layout, information he had from when they were together. And Derek, whom he had known through that forum for over a year, had used that information. Marcus didn't install anything. Marcus didn't photograph anyone. But Marcus drew the map. Under Ohio jurisdiction, that was enough for criminal liability. Both were arrested. But here is what Warwick told me when I asked the obvious question. How many other women were victimized by this and never found out? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, most of them. I need to stop here and talk about something that goes beyond Rachel's case, because if this video has any value beyond making your heart race, it needs to be this. There is a very old tradition, present in virtually every culture and religion in the world, that speaks about the eye that watches without being seen. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, there is the concept of the spy, the hidden observer, someone who positions themselves in secret to gain power over another. In the book of Samuel, there are stories of surveillance that lead to destruction. In Islam, the idea that God sees everything, including what you do in the shadows, exists in direct opposition to the idea that humans who try to hold that kind of power over others are committing one of the greatest possible sins, violating the sovereignty of the privacy that God gave to each individual. But here is what interests me spiritually about this story. Derek was not a monster in appearance. He had no criminal record. He was functional, employed, sociable. His co-workers described him as quiet but normal. The evil he did existed in a completely separate layer from his visible life. And that reminds me of something that comes up repeatedly in the stories I research. This idea that the most dangerous darkness is not the kind you can see. It's the kind that organizes itself in silence for months, for years, right beneath the surface of what looks normal. Rachel didn't know. For 3 months, she slept, lived, existed in her own room without knowing she was being watched, without feeling anything different. Or did she? When I spoke to Rachel about the 3 months before she found the phone, she said something that stayed with me. She said, "I had these strange feelings every now and then, like waking up in the middle of the night with the sense that someone had just left the room. But my door was locked. I figured it was just a dream." She said she had started closing her windows before going to sleep, something she didn't normally do. She said she had started showering with the bathroom light off and the hallway light on, a new habit with no conscious explanation, as if instinctively she wanted to reduce what could be seen. Now you might be thinking, that's just selective memory. She's connecting the dots in hindsight. And maybe part of that is true. But there is an area of behavioral neuroscience that studies exactly this: the capacity of the human nervous system to detect threats at a subliminal level. Researchers at Harvard documented cases where subjects showed measurable behavioral changes in response to stimuli they couldn't consciously identify. In plain language, your body sometimes knows something is wrong before your mind can articulate why. Rachel knew. On some level, she knew. And that phone in a drawer she opened every single day was the universe, or God, depending on your worldview, forcing that knowledge to the surface. But wait. There is a part of this story I haven't told you yet. A part that stayed with Warwick for a long time, and has stayed with me since I heard it. Dana. Remember Dana? The roommate. The person who supposedly never walked into Rachel's room without being invited. During the investigation, the police reviewed security camera footage from the building. There were no internal cameras, just one at the building entrance and one in the second-floor hallway. The hallway footage showed Derek entering the building 3 times over the 3 months before the phone was found. Always during the day. Always when Rachel was at work. But he hadn't forced any lock. There were no signs of forced entry. Someone let him in. The police asked Dana. Dana denied any involvement for weeks. Then, when they showed her the camera footage, she broke down and admitted it. Dana knew Derek. They had briefly been involved in the past, a few weeks. When Derek asked her to let him into the apartment to install a security system to protect both of them, she said she believed him. Or she said she did. The question that Warwick couldn't answer with certainty, and that the prosecutor couldn't either, was whether Dana was genuinely deceived or whether she knew what was actually happening. Dana's case was ultimately closed for lack of evidence that she had knowledge of the true nature of Derek's activities. She was not indicted. Rachel never spoke to Dana again after that. Derek was tried and convicted to 6 years in prison for invasion of privacy, illegal possession of recorded material, and stalking. Marcus was sentenced to 2 years with a suspended sentence and community service for his role in enabling it. Warwick told me the sentence for Derek could have been heavier, but the defense successfully argued that part of the evidence had been obtained irregularly, and the judge reduced the sentence on appeal. 6 years. For more than 3 years of systematic surveillance of at least 5 women. For thousands of images obtained without consent. For destroying the sense of safety in the one place where these women should have been completely secure. Rachel told me that when she heard the sentence, she didn't cry. She said she sat in the courtroom bench and thought of only one thing: 6 years. And then he gets out. She moved away from Columbus 6 months after the verdict. She didn't tell me where. Now I want to talk about something that goes beyond this specific case, because what happened to Rachel is not an isolated event. Here is what most people don't realize. The type of behavior Derek demonstrated, the systematic surveillance, the accumulation of images, the need for control and observation, has been documented by criminal behavior researchers for decades. And what those researchers consistently find is that this kind of behavior rarely begins with hidden cameras. It starts much earlier, with fantasies of control. with the feeling that secretly watching someone is a form of possession, of having something that person doesn't know you have. In psychological terms, this is called coercive voyeurism. But in simpler terms, it is the belief that you are entitled to see what others conceal. That another person's privacy is an obstacle, not a right. And this kind of mindset, according to the research, is alarmingly more common than any of us want to believe. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Sexual Aggression documented that approximately 12% of men surveyed admitted to having recurrent fantasies of observing others without consent. 12%. In any group of 100 people, statistically you are surrounded by at least 12 who think this way. Most never act on it, but some do. And with the technology available today, cameras smaller than a fly with 4K image quality, costing less than $50 online, the barrier to acting on it has become frighteningly low. I need to talk about something Rachel mentioned near the end of our conversation. Something she said almost as a passing thought, but that hasn't stopped haunting me since. She said, "You know what's strangest? After everything came out, I spent months trying to understand how I didn't know. How I could be so close to something so horrible and not feel it. And the only thing that made sense to me was thinking that something was protecting me, guiding me to that drawer on that specific day. Because I had no particular reason to open that drawer that day. I opened it every day, yes. But that day something made me stop and actually look. I'm not a preacher. I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but I have been researching this type of story for years, and I hear variations of that phrase with a frequency I cannot ignore. The person who, for some reason, changes their travel plans and isn't in the place where something horrible happens. The son who, without knowing why, decides to visit his parents exactly the night they need urgent help. The woman who just felt she should check the drawer on that specific day. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe there is something in the universe, call it God, call it divine instinct, call it whatever you want, that sometimes pushes you in the right direction. That plants a seed of discomfort that keeps growing until you can no longer ignore it. Rachel said that after everything, she returned to the faith she had set aside in college. Not out of desperation. Not because she had a classic supernatural experience, she didn't see anything, didn't hear voices. But because the only narrative that made sense to her was that she was not alone in that apartment in the deepest sense of the word. That while Derek was watching her from one angle, something far greater was watching from another. And that the balance eventually was restored. Before I get to the final part of this story, and there is a final part one haven't told you yet, a revelation that came 2 years after Derek's conviction, I want to pause and be direct with you about something practical. Because if this video is worth anything beyond making your heart race, it's this. First, non-consensual surveillance leaves signs. Spy cameras generally need power. Look for devices and outlets you don't recognize, chargers that aren't yours, smoke detectors that appear new or slightly different from the others. There are apps that detect the radio frequency transmissions that wireless cameras emit. Search RF detector app in your app store. They're not perfect, but they work reasonably well. Second, if someone has had access to your space, an ex-partner, a previous tenant, a service provider who worked alone in your apartment, that is enough reason to do a sweep. Not because the world is full of directs, but because the cost of checking is low and the cost of not checking can be devastating. Third, trust your instincts. I know that sounds vague, but Rachel felt something for months. She ignored it. If you are waking up in the middle of the night feeling like something is wrong, if you are unconsciously changing your behavior inside your own home without knowing why, pay attention. Your nervous system is smarter than you think. Now, the final part. 2 years after Derek's conviction, Warwick was contacted by an investigator from another state, Pennsylvania specifically. She was looking into a similar case in Pittsburgh and had found references to Derek's case in shared law enforcement records. She wanted to know about the online forum, the forum where Marcus and Derek had met. Warwick shared what he had. The investigator dug deep. What she found was that this particular forum had among its most active members a man who went by the pseudonym Shepherd. A shepherd, someone who tends to a flock, who knows every movement of every animal in their care. Shepherd wasn't just a member. He was the architect of the community. He created the forum. He established the rules. He coached members on techniques, on how to avoid detection, on how to sync images to servers outside the United States to make tracking harder. Shepherd had been active for at least 6 years before Derek was arrested. The investigator, whose name I won't share to protect the ongoing investigation, spent 8 months tracing Shepherd through metadata, language patterns, and partially recovered IP records. What she found was that Shepherd was not a hacker or a sophisticated technologist. He was a 42-year-old man, married, 2 children, owner of a small residential security company in Ohio. The irony is almost unbearable. A man who sold security, who entered people's homes to protect them, who had the keys to what should have been the safest space in a person's life. When police knocked on his door, according to the investigator, he opened it with a smile. He said, "I've been expecting you," and walked back inside to sit on the living room couch while he waited to be handcuffed. She told me that what disturbed her most was not what was on his computer, although that was horrifying. What disturbed her most was that when they asked him why, when they asked him what he thought he was doing, he answered with complete calm. "I just like knowing they were okay." Shepherd is currently being tried. The case is still ongoing. Let me finish with something I think actually matters. There is a Hebrew word, shomer, which means guardian, protector, the one who watches. In Scripture, God is frequently described as the shomer of Israel, the guardian who never sleeps, who is always watching. But there is a fundamental difference between the guardian and the spy. The guardian watches to protect. The spy watches to possess. Derek, Marcus, Shepherd, they built an entire system around the illusion that secretly observing someone is a form of intimacy. That seeing someone without her knowing she is being seen is a way of truly knowing her. But it's the exact opposite. Knowing someone is an act that requires consent. It requires the other person to choose to reveal themselves to you. Without that, you don't know anyone, you just collect images. You are a thief of moments that were never yours. And what is disturbing on a spiritual level, and I say this without dramatism, with complete seriousness, is that this kind of obsession never satisfies. Every researcher, every criminologist, every therapist who works with this profile says the same thing. The more images you accumulate, the larger the emptiness grows. The more you spy, the further the person truly becomes. It is a hunger that only increases. Rachel is doing well today. She rebuilt her life. She told me the fear hasn't completely disappeared, it probably never will, but that she has learned to live with it in a way that doesn't paralyze her. She said, "I decided that phone is not going to be the most important thing that happened in that room. The most important thing is that I got out." So, what do you do with all of this? You check your space. You trust your instincts. You remember that safety is not a permanent state. It is a continuous practice of attention. And you remember that the most dangerous evil doesn't announce its arrival. It installs itself slowly, in silence, in drawers you open every single day without really looking. Until the day you do. And on that day, as Rachel discovered, the light always wins. Not without cost. Not without pain. But it wins. Always. If this video helped you, if it made you think, if it made you check something in your own space, if it made you feel less alone in being afraid of these things, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had that feeling that something in your space was just off? My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about these things. See you next time.